Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Francesco, and with our get-together today, I want to cover topic 12, exits. Okay, so we're finally going to get to chat about section 3.4, Division B of the Ontario Building Code, which is exits. Now, this is going to be, again, a slightly longer video, probably on par with topic 11. So make sure that you check the timestamps that I've created for you at the bottom. That way you can skip to the portion that's important to you after you view it the first time, or if you're viewing it the first time, okay? I'm hoping that's helpful. With our get-together today, I want to remind you about kind of what we're doing, okay? I introduced the concept of exits, access to exits, means of egress in topic 10, so please go check that out just as a reminder about what all of these things are. But from topic 10, we are finally going to be dealing with the topic of exits. And exits is going to be finally getting through those exits. Remember how we spent a lot of time in topic 11 getting to those exits? No more. Those barriers are gone. We're finally going to get through those exits and find out what the building code requirements are for fire ratings and dimensionings for exits for Part 3 buildings. So the organization about the appropriate portion of the Ontario Building Code is as follows. This is going to be under Division B, Part 3, Section 3.4. That portion of the Ontario Building Code is Section 3.4 called Exits. And then it has subsection 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We are not going to cover all of these. This is an introductory course to the Ontario Building Code, but we're going to cover a little bit of some of these so that if you want to learn more, you'll have the knowledge of where to find that information and kind of how to understand it, hopefully. Okay? Let's get to a bit of the terminology. From topics 10 and 11, there's been terminology that I've used in this course. For this topic, exits, I want to use the terminology that the building code uses, which you can find in Division A, okay, of the Ontario Building Code. And exits means that part of a means of egress, and that includes doorways, that lead from a floor area to a separate building or an open public space or an exterior open space protected from fire exposure from the building and having access to an open public thoroughfare. Now, this is a bit of a mouthful, okay? But basically what this is saying is that the building code defines exits of that portion, a specific portion of a building that is supposed to allow people to safely get out. According to sentence 3.4.1.11, the building code specifically says that exit facilities must be provided for every floor area that is intended for occupancy. What this means is that if people are expected to be there in a specific portion of the building, that portion of the building has to be provided with exit facilities. It's not a maybe, it's black and white, okay? If people are there, they have to get out safely. Exits are required. For this topic, I'm going to use the same imagery that I used for topic 11. So that means that if you see a little flame here, then generally what we're chatting about is going to be the fire rating of whatever it is that we're chatting about. And if you see a little triangle, a measuring tool here, we're going to be talking maybe about dimensions and locations, more of the geometry of that aspect, okay? Another thing too that's important about exits is recognizing whether or not we're talking about exits. I mean, this whole topic is about exits, so everything we talk about now is about exits. But because, as you'll see, exits are so similarly set up in the building code as the previous topic, which is safety within floor areas, it's important that you learn how to recognize between exits and not exits. Literally, it's about being able to answer the question, is it an exit or not? basically, the way to tell whether or not you're dealing with an exit or not is if the word exit is in there. And this is super important, so I want to make sure that we're clear. If you're dealing with a question for our course or a portion of a building that you're analyzing, if the word exit is in that, so if it's an exit corridor, exit stairs, exit door, exit ramp, whatever, then you must deal with it according to section 3.4 of the Ontario Building Code. If the word exit is not there, then you must use section 3.3, that is topic 11. This is so important, I'm just going to try to remind you again. You have to be able to answer the question.
Is it an exit or not?
Make sense? So don't get caught off guard. The word exit has to be there to use the contents of this topic. And if it's not there, then it's about topic 11. Okay? All right. So let's talk about fire separations and the requirements for exits. Part 3 in section 3.4 of the Ontario Building Code is kind of straightforward about this. Under sentences 3.4.4.1, 1, and 2, the building code says that every exit must be separated from the rest of the building by a fire separation that has a minimum fire resistance rating. That fire resistance rating cannot be less than the typical floor assembly that we get from subsection 3.2.2. Remember, we covered this subsection under topics 5 and 6. Every exit. Now, of course, there are some exceptions, and this is typically for smaller buildings and residential type buildings, okay? So go check them out. But I also want to make you aware of these specific exceptions here, okay? These exceptions say that the fire resistance rating of every exit, depending on this typical floor assembly, cannot be less than 45 minutes and need not be more than 2 hours. So it needs to be the same as the typical floor assembly from 3.2.2, but it cannot be less than 45 minutes and it cannot be more than 2 hours. So I figured, how about we practice that and just get comfortable with what this portion of the building code says about the mandatory fire resistance ratings of exits, okay? So let's say that according to subsection 3.2.2, we found that for whatever building we're analyzing, according to topic 5 and 6, remember that? We figure out that the fire resistance rating of the floor assembly needs to be 1 hour. What is going to be then the fire resistance rating of the exit? Okay, so I'm going to remember then what these two say. These two say that the fire resistance rating of the exit has to be the same as the floor, but it cannot be less than 45 and it need not be more than 2 hours. So that means that it's going to be 1 hour. Okay, let's try one more. Let's say from subsection 3.2.2 in Division B of the Ontario Building Code, we figured out that the fire resistance rating of the floor assembly is 0. There's no fire resistance rating required. What is going to be the fire resistance rating then of the exit? Okay, so I'm going to remember these 3 conditions. The first one is that it needs to be the same as the floor. Oh, so 0. But it cannot be less than 45 and need not be more than 2. So what must it be? 45 minutes, right? It can't be less than 45 minutes. Okay, let's do one more. Let's say from subsection 3.2.2, we found that the fire resistance rating of the floor assembly for the building we're analyzing is 2.5 hours or more than that. What is going to be the fire resistance rating mandated for the associated exits? So I'm going to look at these 3 conditions. It must be the same as the floor, so more than 2.5, and it need not be less than 45 and not more than 2. So it's going to be 2 hours. Okay? I hope that helped a little bit. For closures, remember closures from topic 11? For the purposes of this course, this introductory course, we're going to look at closures as doors. But remember, from topic 11, it's not just doors, okay? closures are covered in a slightly different portion of Part 3. They're under subsection 3.1.8 in Division B, okay? But as a reminder, the whole point of having closures in a fire separation is that for people to move from one space in another in a building, they have to go through walls. So people punch holes through walls. However, if that wall needs to be a fire separation, that wall must be continuous. So you have to make sure that that hole that's punched through does not cause that fire separation to lose its fire integrity to prevent the spread of fire. That's where closures come in, because they close those holes and walls. We call those closures doors, for example. And they must provide an equivalent amount of protection to prevent the spread of fire from one side of the fire separation to the other side of the fire separation. That's the whole point of closures. The one thing about closures, though, and this is terminology, lingo, is that closures are not rated according to a fire resistance rating. Instead, they're rated according to a fire protection rating, FPR, just like we did in topic 11. Okay? So just like we did in topic 11, figuring out the FPR, or the fire protection rating for a closure, is answering a yes or no question. And the yes or no question is that closure allowed to be a 20-minute closure? To answer that question, you have to look at the requirements of sentence 3.1.8.12.1. If the requirements in that sentence are met, then that closure is allowed to be a 20-minute closure. That door is allowed to be a 20-minute door. If the requirements of that sentence are not met, then you have to figure out the fire protection rating based on the requirements in table 3.1.8.4. So let me just remind you what these portions of the building code look like. Let's start with sentence 3.1.8.12.1. Find it right here. Okay, you can see it right here. Okay, 3.8.1.12.1. So these are the requirements for a 20-minute closure. So you have to read everything under here to see whether or not the closure that you're looking at, so the door that you're looking at, is allowed to be a 20-minute door. If these requirements are not met, then we have to go to table 3.1.8.4 right here. Maybe let me make it a bit bigger for you. Okay, right here. Okay, and you have to find the requirements for your closure in the rightmost column by using the requirement of the fire separation in the leftmost column. Okay, we talked about this again in topic 11. So for a slightly better discussion of this, you can go back to that if it helps. Let's move on then to the details of exits. That is, how do we figure out how many exits we need, and how do we figure out their location? That is, the distance between exits. We're going to start with the number of exits. How many exits are required in any floor area? What does the building code say about that? Well, the building code is very specific about this. Under sentence 3.4.2.11, it says that at least 2 exits must be in any floor area, except some very stringent requirements for smaller buildings, okay, that are not more than 2 stories and that meet these stringent requirements under these sentences. But for the most part, at least 2 exits, okay? When it comes to distances between exits, so that is, how do you locate where the exits are going to be in a floor area? Well, the building code says under sentence 1, that is 3.4.2.31, that the minimum distance between 2 required exits is half the maximum floor diagonal dimension. So you find that diagonal dimension and then you divide it by 2, and that divided by 2 distance is the minimum distance between 2 required exits. And then it goes on under sentence 3 to say that that distance is based on the minimum distance that smoke would have to travel between exits to affect people trying to get out. Except that there is an added little twist to it, and that is that distance also depends on whether or not there is a public corridor in that floor area. So let me show you what I mean. We have here two examples of two identical floor areas. The only difference is the top floor area here has a public corridor, and the bottom floor area here does not have a public corridor. What that means is that the floor area that has a public corridor is governed by clause 3.4.2.3.1a, whereas the floor area that does not have a public corridor is governed by clause 3.4.2.31b. And what these clauses typically relate to is, in the top floor area, to spaces that have more than one tenant. So multiple tenants in a floor area, whereas the bottom floor area with no public corridor relates to areas that have a single tenant in that floor. That's the main difference between spaces that have and don't have a public corridor for exit distances. So for the floor area that does have a public corridor, what clause 3.4.2.31a says is that the distance between exits cannot be more than 9 meters. So if there are multiple tenants, the distance between two exits cannot be more than 9 meters. If there's only a single tenant, the distance between exits cannot be less than 9 meters. So how do we calculate this? Because I admit it's not super obvious, okay? So let's say we have a very simple floor area. It is just a rectangle, super simple. How do we figure out the distance between two exits that are in this floor area? Notice I'm not showing anything, okay, beyond just this area. Let's assume that the length of the area of this space is A and the width of it is B. To find the diagonal dimension of this floor area, we have to use the Pythagorean theorem. We have to find C. And C is found by doing the square root of A squared plus B squared. So then how do we find the distance between the exits? We take C and we divide it by 2. That's easy for a shape like this. Don't forget about the division by 2, because the most common mistake that the new users of the building code and students make when it comes to calculating the distance between exits is forgetting to divide by 2. All right, let's do a floor area that is not simple, like a rectangle. Let's do something more like this, okay? So what do we do in a case like this? Don't worry. All you do is you just put a rectangle above this, like the biggest rectangle that would fit, or the smallest rectangle that would fit it. And now you have a dimension A for length, a dimension B for length, and you can use Pythagoras' theorem to find C. C is equal to the square root of A squared plus B squared, so that then the distance between exits is half of C. Don't forget about that half of C. So to practice this, let's do an example. Example 1, how do we figure out the minimum distance between exits in this floor plan with a public corridor? I'm going to link for you below a link to a video that just covers this. That way you can always come back to that video on demand. I'm going to do the same for example number 2, that is figuring out the minimum distance between exits when there is no public corridor. The link will be for you below in the description, okay? So now let's move on to talk about the minimum width of exits. This is covered under subsection 3.4.3 of Division B, which is width and height of exits. And what we're going to do is something that you might remember maybe from topic 11. Remember this from topic 11? In topic 11, I introduced to you a scene where the protagonist of a certain movie was running away from the bad guys. And we used that scene to figure out how to determine the width of corridors, stairs, ramps, and the like, doors, okay? Go back to topic 11 to see that scene. Maybe, I don't know, even go watch the movie if you think it might be of benefit to you. But the way that you figure out the minimum width of an exit is that you have to find the larger value of two items. One, the minimum width of that exit for one person to get through comfortably so they don't get stuck like our protagonist did in the movie. And the minimum width for that exit so that all the people using that exit can get through and are not fighting against other people to get through. So again, go back to topic 11 to see how I introduced that scene. It might make more sense then. But we have to find both of these values and then find the larger one of the two. So let's start with figuring out the minimum width of an exit so that one person gets through. How do we do that? Luckily, when it comes to exits, the building code really did a nice job. It put it all in one spot. Under sentence 3.4.3.28, the building code directs you to these two tables, table 3.4.3.2a and b. This is what these two tables look like right here and right here. Maybe I'll make them a bit bigger on your screen. Here's table 3.4.3.2a, okay? Notice how in the leftmost column here, it includes the major occupancy for the building. So only these occupancies can be used for this table. And then in the other four columns here, it includes the minimum widths for exit corridors and passageways, ramps, stairs, and doorways. Don't forget to check any associated note below the table if it's referenced in the table. Table 3.4.3.2b is right here. You'll notice that the difference, the main difference, I guess, is that under major occupancy in the leftmost column here, this table is only for B2 and B3 major occupancies. Only. Okay? So that means then that once you use this table, it's only for B2 and B3, and then the remainder of the columns include exit corridors and passageways here, ramps here, stairs here, and doorways here. But then you'll notice that under ramps, stairs, and doorways, there's also a different width depending on whether or not that space is serving patients or residents' sleeping rooms. Finally, don't forget to check out the notes under the table if they're referenced in the table so that you pick the right values. So then, when it comes to figuring out the minimum exit width for all people, the building code itself tells us under sentence 3.4.3.11 that we must use the occupant load. So that means that we have to figure out how many people are using that space because they will tell us how to figure out the width of that exit. And this again is topic 4, if you remember, occupant load. Now, to figure out then how to use these values related to all the people and the occupant load, as soon as we find out that this is a B major occupancy, immediately we go to sentence 3.4.3.22, which tells us that every person gets 18.4 millimeters. Full stop. Okay, whether it's a door, ramp, corridor, stair, okay, 18.4 millimeters for B major occupancies. If it's not a B major occupancy, then instead we have to start looking at the specifics of what it is that we're looking for. So if we're looking for low slope ramps, doorways, and corridors, the minimum width for that, then it's going to be according to the requirements of 3.4.3.21a, 6.1 millimeters per person. Each person gets 6.1 millimeters. If we're looking at the requirements for stairs that have a rise of not more than 180 millimeters and a run not less than 280 millimeters, then according to the requirements of clause 3.4.3.21b, each person gets 8 millimeters. Finally, for steep slope ramps and all other stairs, each person gets 9.2 millimeters based on the requirements of clause 3.4.3.11c. Does this look familiar to you? If it does, it's because that's what we did in topic 11. That's why, remember the whole thing about
Is it an exit or not?
Differentiating between an exit or not tells you whether we're doing whatever we're analyzing according to topic 11 or topic 12, because there are different parts of the building code with different references. So make sure that you don't forget about our little game of is it an exit or not. Okay, example number 3, we're being asked to figure out the minimum width of the exit stairs for this specific example. I'm going to link the solution to that example in the description below. That way you can come back to it on demand. Okay, I don't want to make this video too long. And for example number 4, this is slightly different. This is a bit of a backwards example. So we're given a whole bunch of information, including the minimum width of the exit stairs. It's already figured out for you. What we have to figure out is how many exit stairs are required based on these given quantities. So the solution for that will be given to you in example 4 linked below. Okay, we're coming to the end. I don't know if you've ever seen this scene in Star Wars. You see right here where the stormtrooper bumps their head on that overhead door? Well, that's important because we want to make sure that if you're using an exit and you're trying to get to safety, you don't bump your head on your way out, right? You don't want an exit that's too short, say. So when it comes to headroom clearance, sentences 3.4.3.41 and 3 say that all exits must be no less than 2,100 millimeters, unless we're dealing with stairs, where that requirement then is brought to 2,050 millimeters above the nosing of the steps, of the stairs. And when it comes to doorways, for doorways, so a doorway opening, that opening need not be less than 2,030 millimeters unless there is a closing device on that door, a self-closing device, and then that requirement is brought to 1,980 millimeters, okay? Now, a little bit more about exit doors, and I promise you we're getting very close to the end of this topic. If you remember, exit doors have this kind of sign above it for some of the older buildings, and they will have this kind of sign above it for the newer buildings. The requirements for this signage is shown in Appendix A under Clause 3.4.5.12c. So go check it out. It will even tell you, I think I should tell you even when these came into effect, but depending on the age of the building, you might see both. But the one thing that I wanted to show you about exit doors is that if you walk up to an exit door and you see that exit sign, so you know it's an exit door, some of them will even tell you what the fire rating is by checking the frame of the door right here. This here is a 45-minute exit door. It's shown as a 3/4 of an hour. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. You'll notice it with some exit door, especially some of the newer ones, and if they have not been painted over, okay? All right. Another thing that's important too when it comes to exit doors is that according to sentence 3.4.6.12.1, all exit doors must swing in the direction of exiting on a vertical axis. So they must be a door like this that you have to be able to push and that it swings on a vertical axis. All doors for exits must be push doors. Okay? Now, this wouldn't be the building code if there weren't some exceptions. You can check out these exceptions, but these are exceptions usually for single dwelling units and then some other stuff that I've linked for you here. Go check it out. Typically, your exit doors are always push doors. The reason I'm making you aware of these exceptions is if you ever find an exit door that's actually a pull door to get out, see if it's because of this. And if it isn't, then that might be a problem, something that needs to be fixed. Okay? All right. I want to talk a little bit about how to exit through a lobby, but first I want to reinforce what we've seen so far. I've put this diagram in your course notes, and basically what this says is you can see the 2 exit stairs here, okay? What those exit stairs are set up, the way that they're set up is that they have a fire resistance rating and a fire separation among them, and that fire separation has to be carried through here to the exits that get you outside of the building in the stories below. Okay, so as soon as a exit space has a fire rating, that fire rating has to be carried through everywhere in that exit path until that person gets out of the building. Sometimes you're allowed for one of those exits to go through a lobby, the lobby of a building. Okay, just like I'm showing here. According to the requirements of sentence 3.4.422, that can only be done under very specific circumstances. That is, you can redirect one of the exits through a lobby, but a lot of requirements need to be made. Some of them are shown in this setup, but there's a lot of things that need to happen. Typically, unless it's absolutely necessary, I recommend trying to avoid, for new construction especially, an exit through a lobby, unless you're aware of all of these requirements that need to happen, okay? Lastly, in your course notes, I've included also some diagrams that show the geometry of exit stairs. Go check them out. It relates to landings, their requirements, how many steps between landings, so on and so forth. They're there for you to be aware of, but I'm not going to be testing you on it. Oh, I know what this is. This is, we come to the end. Okay, so those diagrams are there for your information, so you can go check them out. I also linked the appropriate version of the Ontario Building Code, appropriate portion of the Ontario Building Code that relates to those items related to stairs, the geometry of stairs, but I'm not going to test you on it. So don't forget, you're now ready to do the homework for week 7. Don't forget that the solved examples are linked for you in the description below. And I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate that you're here. The next topic we're going to cover is topic 13, which relates to the additional requirement that subsection 3.2.6 has for these kinds of buildings, so-called high buildings. Bye, everyone.